and I'm here now. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to ask about the format of the meeting tonight. Is it possible to limit the speakers to the people that are living in Temecula city and the surrounding city? Because in my humble opinion, it's not correct that people come from Los Angeles, from other countries over here and talk about the issues that are related to the life of the people that are living in this city. That happened last time during the city planning. The people were coming from the other cities in Los Angeles counties, in many, many faraway places, and they were talking about the subjects not related to the city planning. As a result, we will call it bigot. So I would beg you, is it possible to have a driver license or something to identify the speaker that is living in the city of Temecula or the surrounding cities?
Let me, this is a... Let me ask our city attorney to give an opinion on that. Peter?
Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, both the Brown Act and the planning law do not allow us to restrict public comments on an appeal to persons living within the city. It's all people who have an interest in the matter.
Thank you very much.
Your Honor, may I say with just one word? How could logically the people that are not living in the city of Temecula and they are not driving on the 15 freeway and go exit on the Winchester have an idea about the traffic over here?
We have to follow the rules in here.
I respect the rules.
Thank you very much. City Clerk, I don't have any timers going here.
Okay, let's do one more item and.
Okay. Okay, let's go to our consent calendar. And we want to pull 4. Is that correct?
Pardon me, we do have one on item number 4.
Okay. Okay, let's go to, I don't think we've had the roll call and also city council members. So let's go to the roll call first.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Comachero.
Here.
Edwards. Here. Nagar.
Good evening.
Washington, and Mayor Roberts.
Here. Okay, now let's do council comments. Is there anybody in the queue? I don't see anybody. Is there any? I'm not sure it's working, but okay. Okay, then we'll go to the consent calendar, and they are as follows. First, standard ordinance and resolution adoption procedure. Number 2, action minutes. Number 3, list of demands. Number 4, which we will pull. Number 5, Roypa Ranch, approval of 6 operating memorandum. Number 6 is Second Amendment to the agreement with Proactive Fire Design and Consulting. 7-year agreement for animal control and sheltering services between the City of Temecula and Animal Friends of the Valleys. And number 8, second reading of ordinance number 1101.
I'll make a motion to move the consent with the exception of the number 4, which we're pulling.
Second.
Okay, I have a second. Let's vote. Okay, that's 4-1, yes. 4-0 with 1 not here tonight. Let's go back to number 4. Can I have a staff presentation on this?
Yes, Mayor and members of the City Council, you have before you tonight 2 resolutions related to the Temecula Valley Tourism and Business Improvement District. These assessments are approved annually, but the initial steps are to set a public hearing, which would be the next City Council meeting. What we would do at that point is bring forward the annual reports and marketing plan for the Convention and Visitors Bureau. The assessment is an annual assessment of 4% on room taxes for all the hotels in this district. These revenues are used to market the Temecula Valley and the Temecula area. So at that time, you would take public comment, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau would have an opportunity to give you their marketing plan for the coming year and the use of these funds.
Okay. Mr. Comachero.
Just a quick question. I want to be sure as we do this that this assessment on our hotel properties is with the consent of all those properties. Is that correct?
That's correct. The hotel owners all would vote to levy this tax on their businesses.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was my question too, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. Would you call it first the only public speaker on this?
Yes, sir. John Kelleher.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is John Kelleher. I'm chairman of the board of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and I come to you as a citizen of Temecula who loves this region. The assessment is a self-assessment, and really I am just here to thank you as a city for supporting what we do as a community to promote ourselves as a destination. There is a great deal of cooperation among all of the different entities, and as a result, the 6,000 jobs that do depend on hospitality in this region and the $600 million of economic impact that tourism brings to this area continue to thrive, and we at the CVB see a very bright future for that. All of the signs are positive. It's one of the few positive areas that we see in our economy, and we know that that takes a lot of support. We thank you for that, and that is the purpose of my meeting. Thanks.
Okay. And we look forward to you being here for the public hearing at our next meeting.
We shall be here.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, move adoption of resolutions 4.1 and 4.2.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Okay, the vote is 4-0 with one absent. Before I go to turn it over to the Temecula Community Services District meeting, I just want to let everybody know that all of the public wishing to speak on item 14, which is the appeal of the Planning Commission's decision approving the Islamic Center of Temecula, please have your speaker slips turned in prior to the start of the public hearing. Once the public hearing has begun, no further speaker slips will be accepted. So you have plenty of time yet, because we have two more things to go through before we get to that. But I just want to let everybody know, if you wish to speak tonight, get your slips in before we start that hearing. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to turn this over to the Temecula Community Services District and President Jeff Comachero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to call this meeting of the Temecula Community Services District to order. Madam Clerk, let's take the roll this evening.
You'd like to roll? I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes. Since we're not all here.
Director Edwards. Here. Nagar.
Present.
Roberts.
Here.
Washington. President Comachero.
Here. Do we have any public comments tonight on this?
No, sir, we do not.
Thank you. Then we'll dispense with that. We have two items under the consent calendar this evening. Item 9, approval of the action minutes of January 11th, 2011, and item 10, the Youth Work Experience Program Partnership.
Move approval of CSD consent calendar.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the consent calendar. Please cast your vote.
Waiting for one vote.
I hit mine.
Wouldn't you know?
That motion carries 4-0 with Mr. Washington absent. Do we have a director's report tonight?
Nothing tonight, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
Nothing tonight, Mr. President.
Move
Do
adjournment.
it. We have a motion for
Second.
adjournment. Or a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 We'll stand adjourned.
Okay. This time I'll call the meeting of the Temecula Redevelopment Agency to order. Madam City Clerk, let the records reflect all agency members are present, with the exception of agency member Washington. Do we have any public comments?
No, sir, we do not.
Then we'll move to the consent calendar, the action minutes from January 11th, 2011. Moved by Mr. Comachero, seconded by Agency Member Edwards.
Sorry.
Please cast your vote. Do we have a report of the department? That motion carries 4-0, 1 absent. We have a department report?
Nothing tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Agency members?
No.
Nothing. One update from me. I believe Mr. Wayne Hall, I see him out there, wave Wayne, wanted an update on our redevelopment agency and what's going on with the state of California. That is up on our website. You'll find it very comprehensive. Appreciate you bringing that up. And if anybody has any questions, please email the city council or call the city manager's office. All in favor?
First, I'll move adjournment to February 8th.
Thank you. Yeah. A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Okay. Okay. We're going to go to the public hearing now. And once again, before I open up the comments for the public hearing, if anybody still wishes to speak, please get your paperwork in right now before I open the public hearing. And I don't see anybody. It looks like everybody heard that. So let's start. Any person may submit written comments to the City Council before a public hearing or may appear and be heard in support of or in opposition to the approval of the project at the time of the hearing. If you challenge any of the projects in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city clerk at or prior to the public hearing. And I'd also like to suggest that we probably break about 9 o'clock and maybe every hour after that for about 7 minutes to give us all a little time to get up and stretch, because this will be a long meeting for sure. First, we're going to have Eric Jones present the staff report. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Planning Application PA08-0345 is an appeal of the Planning Commission's approval of planning documents related to the Temecula Valley Islamic Center. It will be a two-phase development plan and a conditional use permit for a two-story, 24,943 square foot structure within a VL zone here in the city of Temecula. The presentation I'm about to give will encompass two portions. The first portion, we're going to look at elements specific to the project, and then we're going to look at elements with the appeal. With that said, the project is generally located on the southwest corner of Nicholas Road and Calle Calibre in the red area you see before you. General plan designation for this property is very low residential, as is the zoning designation. Religious facilities are permitted in all residential zones upon the approval of a conditional use permit. Phase 1 of the project will consist of a 4,157 square foot structure. The structure will consist of a prayer hall, restrooms, as well as storage space. Primary access will be at the southern end of Calle Calibre, and a second access will be located approximately 200 feet south of Nicholas Road on Calle Calibre, and the secondary access will be comprised of DG. Parking for Phase 1. The Development Code gives two stipulations for parking. It's either one space per every 3 fixed seats or one space per every 35 square feet of assembly area where there are no fixed seats. Now, mosques do not use fixed seats. Therefore, staff went with the 1 per 35 ratio. And when we did that, we discovered that required parking spaces for Phase 1 were 91 spaces. The applicant provided 104. Here we have a site plan depicting Phase 1. Just to orient you, here we have Nicholas Road. Here's Calle Calibre. Here's that primary access I was discussing here at the end of the cul-de-sac. Parking is located here in the rear. The blue shaded area is the structure itself. And then here's that secondary access. That's going to be DG right through here. Phase 2 will comprise of a 20,786 square foot two-story addition. This structure will contain a prayer hall with an internal balcony, classroom and office space, as well as restrooms and kitchen space. Primary access will again remain at the end of Calle Calibre, and the secondary access will be in the same location, however, now it will be paved. Parking for Phase 2 will again be on the same ratio, 1 per 35 square feet of assembly area. But the Phase 1 sanctuary will actually be converted to classroom use. So when staff was calculating the parking for Phase 2, what we looked at for Phase 1 no longer counted anymore because that area will now, as I just mentioned, be used for classrooms. So when we looked at the prayer areas, we found that using our development code, 98 spaces would be required. However, the applicant has chosen to provide 181 spaces. Here we have a site plan depicting the project with both Phases 1 and 2. The blue area, obviously Phase 2, and the yellow is Phase 1. Here's the additional parking. Here's that secondary access, which will now be paved. And then the remaining primary access remains over here at the end of Calle Calibre. Parking comparison. Staff reviewed the parking requirements of the 2 adjacent churches and what they actually provided. And what we found was that Grace Presbyterian Church was built in 2 phases. The Phase 1, they were required to have 101 spaces, but they actually provided 104. And for Phase 2, they were required to have 150 spaces, but they actually provided 151. Calvary Baptist was required to have 34 spaces, but 116 were actually provided. Architecture. The project will incorporate a blend of Mediterranean and traditional Islamic elements. A lot of the materials used will consist of mission-style clay for the roofing, stucco, and metal seam roofing for the domes and the minarets. The following exhibits will show elevations of the project. This is Phase 1. The elevation here on the top is looking from Calle Calibre, looking towards the west. Here would be the front of the structure right here. The bottom exhibit is the exact opposite side of the building. Here is the rear of the building if you were standing behind it facing north. And then here's the exact opposite view if you're in the front of the building facing south. Now this exhibit here, these panes are at an angle. So this bottom exhibit shows what those look like head on. For Phase 2, the top elevation shows the view from from Nicholas Road. The bottom view shows from Calle Calibre. Now what we have here is a delineation line which shows Phase 1 over here and Phase 2 on this side. Here we have another view from Calle Calibre, slightly different angle. Again, we have the delineation line, Phase 1 right over here, Phase 2. The bottom exhibit is the exact opposite side, so as if you're facing the east. Delineation line, Phase 1, Phase 2. Operations. The statement of operations indicated that the mosque will be open Monday through Thursday from 5:30 a.m. until 6 a.m. for morning prayers, and 8:30 a.m. until 8:30 p.m. until 9:15 p.m. Friday, the traditional day of worship for the Muslim faith, the mosque will be open from 12:15 p.m. to 2:45 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Saturday, on the last week of the month, the mosque will be open from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And Sunday, for Sunday school purposes, the mosque will be open from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We also saw that no daycare facility will be included as part of the project. There'll be no formal educational institution. There's just the Sunday school that I just discussed. And there'll also be no external speakers or audible calls to prayer. Project height. The height limit in the very low residential zone is 35 feet. The main structure height for both phases is 33.5. Now, when you include the dome and the top of the crescents, then we come up to the 43. And the reason that we're able to do that is because the development code gives an allowance for 15 feet for architectural elements. So having the maximum height being 43 feet, the project still stays within that 15-foot threshold. A traffic study was done for the project. The study was prepared by an independent firm. The study assumed a completion of both phases by 2013. We did this in order to come up with a worst-case scenario for the project. So when the study was completed, it was done as if both phases were actually operational by 2013, everything up and running. In order to do that, the study analyzed several intersections. The traffic consultant looked at Winchester Road's intersections with Margarita and Nicholas Road's intersections with General Kearney Road, and Calle Calibre, and we also looked at Walcott Lane and La Serena Way. Several cumulative projects were also included in the analysis. These were the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witness, which is a religious facility which was approved for just down the road, Serafina, which is a residential project, Rorapa Ranch, another residential project, and an AM/PM car wash, obviously a commercial use, and Walcott Estates, which is another residential project in the area. A 2% growth factor was also used in the calculations, and this 2% growth rate is an industry standard and is typical of these types of studies, so it's typical to see this information in this type of report. The timeframe studies were existing year, at the time it was 2010, opening year 2013, with and without the project, again, using a worst-case scenario, so both phases up and running. And then a cumulative year, with and without the project at 2013, which included Rorapa. And then we also did the same analysis, but we had Rorapa excluded. And the reason we did that is because Rorapa is expected to have significant impact, and they're also expected to have a variety of different improvements to mitigate that impact. We wanted to see what the impacts of the mosque would be if, by chance, those improvements never went in. So as a just-in-case factor, again, we're looking for worst case here. That's what we're trying to do. The study times analyzed were on Friday between the peak hours of 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. The results of the traffic study indicated the project will have no adverse impact on the surrounding street system with the recommended mitigation. That mitigation stated that the project shall restripe the eastbound Nicholas Road at Calle Calibre to provide a two-way left turn lane. Staff then indicated that a mitigated negative declaration was developed for the project, and that MND indicated that there would be no significant effects on the environment provided the Mitigation Monitoring Program was followed. Now we'll get into the different aspects of the appeal. The first contention had to do with parking. The appellant's contention stated that the parking formula is incapable of ensuring that there's adequate parking available for Muslim facilities. The staff response is that the development code makes no distinction between religious denominations. Again, as I indicated earlier, parking for the project was calculated at 1 space per 35 square feet of assembly area. This exhibit shows a floor plan of phase 1, and the blue shaded area is the area that was used for the calculation. Everything over here are the restrooms and the storage I spoke about earlier. Now we have phase 2, the first floor. The shaded area is the new prayer area, and the red portion is the phase 1 that you just saw, which I indicated earlier would no longer be used for assembly. It's going to be used for classroom spaces, and what they've even done is put in a couple extra rooms to accommodate the classroom uses. So on the first floor, you're only going to have prayer in this blue shaded area. Phase 2, this is the upper balcony. Again, the blue shaded area represents the prayer area that was used for South's calculations. The Institute of Transportation Engineers has recently come up with a parking generation report. And in that report, mosques were uses that were considered. And what the report concluded was that 6.3 spaces per 1,000 square feet are needed in order to ensure adequate mosque parking. And what's interesting to note is that the ITE used the total square footage of the mosque's facilities, not just the prayer areas. So they looked at offices, classroom space, everything, total square footage. When we used their calculations and their methodology, we saw that phase 1 would require 21 spaces, phase 2 would require 158 spaces. And then just as a comparison again, the city development code requirements, we have phase 1 with 91 spaces and 104 provided, and phase 2 with 98 spaces with 181 provided overall. So we can still see that even using the ITE's requirements, there's still adequate parking. Next contention was that the release of the traffic study did not give the public enough time to review the document. The traffic study was actually released with the rest of the hearing documents for the Planning Commission on Wednesday, November 24th, 2010. So there was adequate time available. Traffic study, the next contention, the traffic study did not evaluate heaviest usage and rush hour. Again, as I indicated earlier, the time studies were based on the actual operations of the use. Next contention, accident history was not considered in the traffic study. The traffic impact analysis studies, actually, they don't include accident histories for these types of studies, so it's not uncommon to not see this information in there. Appellant's contention for a traffic study. The study did not evaluate appropriate intersections and streets. The studied intersections and streets were selected using guidelines established by the County of Riverside's Traffic Impact Analysis Preparation Guide. And using this guide is standard practice, so it's typical to see this information and this methodology used. The infrastructure improvements must be installed immediately. Staff response: future infrastructure improvements are expected to be developed as part of residential projects in the surrounding area. And this goes back to what I was discussing earlier with Rorapaw Ranch. The project will generate more traffic and will create a substantial burden on the religious exercise of adjacent uses. As indicated earlier, the project with the traffic study has been determined to have a less than significant impact provided the mitigation is followed. Therefore, there will be no violation of RLUIPA. Emergency access. The appellant's contention is that rescue vehicles will have restricted access on Calle Calibre during an emergency due to the increased congestion of cars coming out of the mosque and out of the Calvary Baptist Church. Staff response is that the street improvements will be installed with both phases per the conditions of approval, bringing the Calle Calibre up to city standards, and all these improvements meet emergency vehicle access, and they've been reviewed by the fire department and the police department, and those departments have accepted the improvements. Environmental. The applicant contends that Grace Presbyterian Church was required to complete an environmental impact report, while the particular project we're discussing tonight only had to do a mitigated negative declaration. Staff researched our files and we found that a mitigated negative declaration was also done for Grace Presbyterian Church on June 18, 2003. So what we found is that both projects went through the same environmental process. The applicant also contended that the MND was not presented to all appropriate agencies for review. Staff submitted the MND to all the responsible agencies, and agencies that chose to comment, we included their comments in the final MND, so we were able to show that we did in fact send it out. Floodplain issues. The applicant contends that other religious facilities have been told they could not build in the project area because of the floodplain. Staff response is that no religious facilities have been told they could not build in the area. In fact, all 3 applications for religious facilities in the project area have been approved. This includes the Jehovah's Witness I talked about earlier. There was also an expansion to Calvary Baptist Church and then the Grace Presbyterian Church. All those projects were approved. In addition, only phase 1 of the proposed mosque can proceed immediately. For phase 2 may proceed only after FEMA accepts a conditional letter of map revision. The next slide shows 2 photos. The first photo was presented as part of the appeal, and this shows Calle Calibre and the project site right after the series of storms that we just had. Staff went out several days later after everything dried up and took a similar photo, and we saw that there was a gutter through here, so we would expect to see some flooding in this area considering the rain that we had. The next slide shows the actual location of the proposed project, the small square being phase 1, the large square being phase 2, the purple line representing that drainage ditch that I just discussed, and the blue portion is the flooding that was depicted on the photo presented as part of the appeal. So as we can see here, based on the information presented, it doesn't look as though the flooding will reach the structure. Another contention made by the appeal is that city officials are attempting to remove the property from having floodplain designation. Staff response is that FEMA stipulates the floodplain boundaries, not local municipalities. It's under FEMA's control, not ours. Denied permits. The appellant contends that other religious organizations have inquired about constructing facilities in the project area and that these have been denied. Well, as I indicated earlier, Calvary Baptist Church had their expansion approved, Grace Presbyterian was reviewed and approved, and the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witness has also been approved. And all these projects are in the general area. Project height. Appellant contends that the equal footing intent of RLUIPA will be violated if the project height exceeds the steeple of Calvary Baptist Church. As indicated earlier, the maximum project height is 43 feet, including the cressets, and Calvary Baptist Church height is 60.5 from the bottom of the stairs facing Calle Calibre. And I have several exhibits to indicate that. Here we have Calvary Baptist Church, the base of the stairs up to the steeple. And then we also have an exhibit here showing the proposed mosque, 43 feet. And we also took into account the different grade variations. So we have here is Calvary Baptist Church and the Islamic Center Temecula Valley and their grades. Looks like we have a 2.5 foot difference. We have that 60.5-foot height right here for the Baptist church. And then we also have the 43-foot height right here. And we can still see, even when taking into account the different grade differentiation, the mosque is still shorter and does not exceed that of Calvary Baptist Church. Appellate's contention: the project may produce a safety hazard for the French Valley Airport. The Riverside County Airport Land Use Commission provided the following mitigation after reviewing the project, which was sent to them by staff. First is that it must prohibit any use which would direct steady lights or flashing lights of red, green, or amber towards an aircraft. Next, prohibit any use which would cause sunlight to reflect towards an aircraft. Also prohibit any use which would generate smoke or water vapor which would attract large concentrations of birds. And prohibit any use which would generate electrical interference that may be detrimental to the operation of aircraft. In addition, any outdoor lighting must be shielded so that way it doesn't distract aircraft. And a notice of airport vicinity shall be provided to the potential purchaser of the property should it ever be sold, which shows that they are in fact in an airport zone. Sunday operations. The appellant contended that allowing the Sunday school to operate will create increased traffic congestion when you couple that with the other existing uses. The traffic study confirms that the addition of Sunday school will not create congestion beyond what is capable of the existing streets in the area. Substantial burden. These are issues related to RLUIPA. Substantial burden verbiage within RLUIPA requires that the project be moved to a new location. As we indicated earlier, religious facilities are permitted within very low residential zoning districts, provided a CUP has been approved. The appellant also indicated that staff violated the Brown Act in several ways. The first of these violations is that we did not notice the project site before a hearing, and we ultimately noticed the wrong project property and then allowed that sign to fail. Staff response is that the development code and state law indicates that hearings shall be posted not less than 10 days before a public hearing. The project was intended to go to hearing in August. However, it was delayed until the November 17th hearing. The reason for that delay was that the applicant volunteered to have a traffic study completed. So the project was never actually noticed for August because no August hearing was ever slated. The sign was inadvertently placed on the wrong property for the November 17th hearing. And upon learning this, staff had the sign company go back out, switch it over to the correct property, and then we had to, because of the 10-day requirement, move the hearing date to December 1st, 2010. Now, once the sign was placed on the right property, we went out there every single day to make sure it was up there, didn't fall over, everything looked good. The second violation of the Brown Act was the memorandum changing future Planning Commission dates to the new Civic Center, and that caused confusion for some of the folks reading the agenda. The agenda report did in fact indicate that the new City Hall would be used for all future Planning Commission meetings, but it was actually in a completely different section. What I have before you here is a copy of that agenda, and we see under consent calendar, item 2 is the change in location for Planning Commission meetings, and then here in the separate public hearing items, under item number 3, that is where all the documents could be found for the proposed mosque. So it was in 2 separate sections. Third violation of the Brown Act had to do with including an approval resolution. The appellant felt that that was premature, when in fact the Brown Act requires that a resolution based on staff recommendations be presented for public review. Had the project been denied, staff would have returned with a resolution of denial for the next Planning Commission meeting. Senate Bill 375. The appellant contends that Senate Bill 375 is designed to lessen sprawl, and it was never considered as part of the review process for the project. Staff response is that SB 375 is implemented by the state's metropolitan planning organizations and not staff. SB 375 thresholds, they only apply to specific projects when an applicant requests a streamlined CEQA review or exemption. No such requests were ever made of staff by the applicant. The appeal also states that video was supposed to be provided as part of the appeal, which showed parking and traffic conditions of the Corona Mosque. Staff never received these videos. We received several frequently asked questions throughout the process, and we'll go through several of these now. First question, will there be audible calls to prayer? I already mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating that no, there will not. And in fact, the statement of operation indicates that there will be no external speakers and no audible calls to prayer. The project has also been conditioned to comply with the Statement of Operations, which state that. Does the project include a basement? No. How will the project be funded? The city can only evaluate projects from a land use perspective, and we never look at funding as part of a land use review. Next question. Was the traffic consultant selected by the applicant? No. Staff used the standard request for proposal process to select the traffic consultant. Is it appropriate to place a mosque adjacent to churches and existing residential? The code evaluates mosques as religious facilities, and as indicated earlier, they're permitted in all residential zones with the approval of a conditional use permit. Isn't the structure too large? As indicated earlier, the project meets all code requirements and is within the range of adjacent religious facilities as far as size is concerned. Calvary Baptist was approved for 21,453. Grace Presbyterian was originally approved for 23,770, but they did receive an approval to have additional square footage, bringing their total up to 27,702. How is parking calculated? As indicated earlier, we use the 1 space per 35 square feet of assembly area without fixed seats. Since fixed seating will not be used as part of the project, staff believes we calculated the parking correctly. Finally, after reviewing the appeal and re-reviewing our work, staff still feels that the mitigated negative declaration prepared for the project was correct, and that there will be no significant environmental factors provided the Mitigation Monitoring Program is followed. In conclusion, staff recommends that the City Council uphold the Planning Commission approval and deny the appeal. This concludes staff's presentation. I'm available to answer any questions you have. We also have the traffic consultants, and we have the applicant, and we have the appellant for questions as well. Thank you.
Okay. We have Pat Richardson that will answer any questions that council has, or do you want to ask right now?
I'd like to ask.
Okay.
If that's questions of staff, I don't care who winds up answering it. That's fine. Just a couple of questions concerning your presentation. You looked at the 2013 condition under the assumption that Raw Paw Ranch had been built in one of your scenarios, right?
Yes, sir.
Is that assuming that the entirety of the project is built out?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
That's pretty
aggressive.
Yeah, we looked at all the improvements that would be associated with Roar Paw Ranch when it finally is constructed. Again, we were trying to go for the worst case scenario, which is why we took it out and did another analysis that way as well.
Okay, no, when I say aggressive, I mean that's exactly what you did, so I agree with that. You talked about the traffic study showing that that there was sufficient road capacity to handle the traffic in the before and after mosque condition.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a little bit of a briefing on what the service levels are today and what they go to using the A, B, and C categories that we normally use to gauge traffic?
We'll ask the traffic engineer who prepared the study to respond to that question.
If you'll bear with me for a moment to open the appropriate pages. On the Friday peak hour, looking at some of the intersections in the existing condition now, the 5 intersections that we looked at vary from a level of service F, which is failing Winchester at Margarita, Winchester, Nicholas, to a D at Nicholas and General Kearney Road, and A's at Nicholas and Kai Calibri, and Walcott Lane and La Serena Way. In the Sunday conditions, the worst level of service is an E at Winchester and Nicholas, a D at Winchester and Margarita, and it gets better from there, a C and an A for the remaining intersections.
So if I can interrupt you for a minute. So it seems to indicate, and correct me if I'm wrong, that shows that in the after condition, looking at the hours of operation, the condition is better than it is in the worst case scenario, which would be F in those intersections, correct?
Yes, including the fact that there are a certain amount of improvements that are being delivered in that area as well, depending on whether or not Roar Paw Ranch is in or out.
Okay. But presumably then, if Raw Ranch does not develop and does not perform on the improvements, they're not creating the impact either.
That's true.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
You have a question?
I did.
I just have a couple more, but.
Oh, you still?
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
just, they're quick ones.
I thought you were-
You cited the ITE guidelines that apparently were issued after the traffic studies, correct?
That report was actually done in July of last year.
Okay, but you did analyze.
We did look at it,
based on
yes.
that.
We used their methodology as well as part of this appeal
Do
review.
you suppose it's been brought up in the past that a potential flaw in the traffic study was the fact that the mosque couldn't or shouldn't be considered as other houses of worship because parishioners stand rather than sit? And so is it your opinion that in that 6.3 parking per 1,000 square feet, that's what was taken into consideration? Is that what made it different?
What made it different is that the 6.3, when the ITE went through and looked at different mosques, they looked at it from a total square footage perspective. They didn't just look at the prayer areas. That's what made it different. As far as the difference between using a prayer area and using the total square footage, they came out with the 6.3.
Which is more intense than...
It is more intense, yes.
Okay. Also, you talked about that in order to build Phase 2, the applicant needs to go to FEMA and submit a CLOMAR. What happens if FEMA denies that map revision?
Well, what they would have to do, the applicant would have to go back and they would have to re-engineer the project to make sure that it's up above the floodplain.
Okay, so either way, it's not building in the floodplain?
Either way, it's not building in the floodway,
Okay.
the floodplain.
You talked about before, the question was raised that other houses of worship in the area had been denied, and you cited 3 examples of ones that had not been denied.
Correct.
Have any been denied?
No, not according to our records.
Okay.
Those are the only 3 religious facilities we've received in that area.
Okay, and lastly, in terms of the noticing requirement and the signs that one was in the wrong place, et cetera, how long was the noticing sign up in the final phase prior to the December 1st? I know we have 10-day is the requirement. How long was it actually up in the right location, didn't fall? Did it meet those 10 days, and by how much?
I believe it was 13 days. I'd have to double check, but it was well over the 10.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Nagar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good questions, Mr. Comachero. You took about 3 or 4 of mine, but they were thorough. Just a couple real quick. What was the thinking of taking access off of Cali Calibre as opposed to taking access off of Nicholas?
Greg, chime in on that.
If I may, Nicholas Road, I don't know off the top of my head exactly what the roadway designation is in the circulation element, but it is more of a circulation street rather than a arterial or an access, other way around. It's more of an arterial street for circulation, and we like to minimize access points onto those streets so that we have driveways onto smaller collector streets, and that way we can stage cars on there and they're not having to access through higher lanes or higher volumes of traffic on the busier street.
Got it. And a related question, Mr. Butler, is what kind of traffic control mechanism, if any, will be at Nicholas and Cali Calibre? Did you have any concerns in relation to particularly, let's say, left turns going northbound on Nicholas from Cali Calibre?
No, at present, there's only going to be a stop sign on Cali Calibre. Nicholas traffic, again, being a circulation street, will have uncontrolled or, through traffic will not be stopped by any traffic control devices. Mm-hmm. We have recommended with the traffic engineer's input that there be a 2-way left turn lane installed on Nicholas Road. One, that will allow left turns coming, let's call it northwest, if you will, to get out of the through lane and allow traffic to pass, but that will also allow cars turning left out of Cali Calibre to get into that painted median, if you will, and then the ability to accelerate into the flow of traffic on the opposite side, rather than having to cross 2 lanes of traffic.
And you're comfortable with that in the interim condition prior to, let's say, the full road improvements that, in particular, Aurora will build? You're comfortable with that configuration with the 3 houses of worship being there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. And then one question, maybe this is for the city attorney, as it has to do with the statement of operations and the call to prayer. We always want to be sensitive to our lupus, particularly when you are talking about the tenets of any religion. I don't know the tenets of religion of Islam to every detail, but I believe I've heard that the call to prayer is a tenet of their religion. So my question is, if they agree in their statement of operations with the CUP, is there some point that in the future they can say, well, we absolutely positively need to have this call to prayer, and if you deny it in the CUP in the future, that we violated our LUPA and have to grant it to them?
I would direct that to the applicant when they come up to speak, because it is my understanding that they are the ones that prepared the statement of operation, and they are the ones that said that there would not be a call to prayer.
I'll make that inquiry, but if they change their mind, if they agree to it in the CUP and then claim it's a tenet of faith 5 years from now, what do we do? Where do we stand? Is the CUP binding in that effect?
Yes, the CUP is binding until they come in and make a request to make a change, and then at that point in time, you'd have to evaluate whether that is required for their tenet of faith, whether it is a substantial burden on them, and whether or not there's a compelling governmental interest in dealing with it. I will tell you at this point in time, there are several cases that have dealt with that, and there are mixed results as to how the courts have dealt with those. So they're not asking for it now, and if they ask for it in the future, we would deal with it.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, with your permission, may I inquire of the applicant? Perhaps we can just dispense with that issue completely for the evening?
You can ask him now, or you can ask him later.
My pleasure is to just ask him now, because that may take it off the table for anybody who may inquire about it in public speakers.
Okay. All right. Would you come up? Please state your name.
My name is Hadi Nayal. I'm the Islamic Center of Temecula Valley Chairman. As stated in the statement of operation, we will not be calling for prayer outside. There will be no megaphones. We'll be only calling for the prayer inside the facility, and you will not be able to hear it from the outside. We will not be asking in the future for calling for the prayer from the outside.
If I may be a little more specific, so as you grow, because obviously you're building your house of worship to grow just like the other congregations next to you, you will not feel that not being able to do that is absence in your religion, that somehow you'll be being deprived of something?
Well, before the microphones and all that kind of stuff, I mean, people, other faith, they used to call outside because they didn't have any the technology we have nowadays. So really, there's really no need for it.
Very well.
And I feel comfortable with it. And we respect the rule and the regulation of this country. We're American citizens. We respect the law. We adhere to the law.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One last question of planning, perhaps, Mr. Jones. I presume that are any outside activities allowed here? And I say that in the context of the other congregations as well, that may also utilize amplified sound, a picnic, an auction or anything like that?
Well, certainly any use can apply for what's called a temporary use permit if they want to have a special one-day or weekend event. But that's, reviewed on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, let me also respond to that. We typically, when you'll have religious institution that has a fall festival or something like that, where it's more intense than just your normal activities that would occur. The TUP would be the process, but many churches do events, especially around certain holidays, Easter, where they may do things outside. What they are regulated, and it's not called out in their CUP, but they have to adhere to the city's noise requirements. So there are certain things that rise to the level of a TUP, but there will be some events that we just don't regulate.
Very good. Thank you. Nothing more.
Thank you. Mrs. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Patrick, I guess this is going to go back to you because it deals with the noise ordinance. So, making no assumptions, but how would we enforce the noise ordinance in this case if something happened and calls to prayer were offered?
It would be through our code enforcement process. We on a regular basis get noise complaints, and our code enforcement office, along with the police department, they have decibel readers, noise equipment that can go out and measure the noise. If it exceeds the code requirement for the number of decibels, and that changes depending on the time of the day. Obviously, between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., it's much less than during normal hours. But if they are exceeding those noise limits, they are in violation and they can be cited.
And so if there are repeat offenses, could you explain how that works?
What happens is the city has a civil penalty process that if they continue to violate the noise ordinance, they can continue to receive increasing fines that can reach thousands of dollars if they don't comply with the noise ordinance.
Thousands of dollars with each instance?
Yes. After a certain number of violations.
And I might ask the city attorney, we received dozens, if not hundreds of emails prior to this hearing, and many of the questions were repeated over and over again in the emails. They were common, and one question that kept coming up: why does the city not look at the funding behind these types of projects? Why don't we look at funding?
Mr. Mayor, if you wish, I do have a couple of comments on the legal issues, and I'll address that
Can
one.
you address it, Tim?
Specifically, yeah.
Yes.
As you know, under California law, the city has the responsibility of dealing with land use entitlements, and under that authority, there are two basic questions that you need to review in any land use application. One is whether the project complies with the state code, with the zoning ordinance of the city, and the second is, are there any impacts on the environment, of the physical environment of the proposed project that are impacting the area, and how are those being mitigated? Under federal law, there is an added layer of analysis that goes on with respect to religious facilities that come before the city, and that's the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And what that act says under federal law is that the city may not implement a land use decision, either to deny a permit or to condition it, in such a manner that it imposes a substantial burden on the religious exercise of the facility, unless the city finds that that condition or that denial furthers a compelling governmental interest, and that denial or condition is the least restrictive means of getting there. That act also requires that the city may not impose a condition or deny a permit if it in any manner treats a religious assembly on less than equal terms with non-religious assemblies, so you have to treat religious and non-religious equally, discriminates against the religious assembly, or a general zoning in such a way that no religious facilities can be added to the community. Some people have argued that Islamic religious facilities are not subject to our LUPA, and while that argument has been made, the federal courts have routinely found that it is applicable to Islam, either people practicing that or to Islamic facilities. With respect to this project, the opposition basically has two sets of concerns. One you heard Mr. Jones describe tonight that the appellant has made in his briefing on this, and those are land use issues relating to traffic, to parking, to the height, to flooding, to emergency access. The second set of issues deal with the religious, social, and political beliefs of Islam. Several comments that Islam is inconsistent or opposed to Judeo-Christian religions, concern about the establishment of Sharia law, and that certain Islamic facilities are associated with radical politics. The City Council has clear jurisdiction to deal with the land use issues that have come up. As I said before, those are all items that you are required to look at under California law, consistent with the ARLUPA, the federal statute, and you're free to look at that. The city does not have the authority and cannot deny or condition this project based on the religious, social, or political beliefs of the Islamic Center or Islam in general. That's basic First Amendment law relating to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of association. And similarly, that is where the answer to your question comes. Both under California law and under freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, the inquiry into how something is funded is not within the jurisdiction of the city. Your land use authority goes to what is asked to be built, whether it complies with city codes, whether there are any adverse impacts on the physical environment, and how to mitigate those impacts. And funding is not one of those. The only time that funding comes up is you can't ask for security. If you're going to ask for, some type of public improvement, you can ask them to put up a bond to ensure that it's done, but you cannot inquire into where they get their money from or how it's going to be spent.
Then to follow up, Peter, what would happen if a city ruled against or in favor of a religious institution based on the tenets of the religion, the background of the leaders, the funding sources, and beliefs in other things like Sharia law? What would happen if we would deny the project based on that?
Well, if you base the denial on those types of issues, the applicant would most likely file a lawsuit. And the court would, determine whether or not it was valid and perhaps force the city to approve the project. The other thing that happens is the United States Department of Justice will often get involved. In the city of Walnut currently, they are being sued by the federal government for their denial of a religious facility in their city, that was comparable to other facilities that have been approved. So there's two lawsuits that would probably come out of a decision such as that.
And the implications to the city are that they would either have to grant approval of the project, and would there be monetary?
It's possible. Usually the
Fines
first step is to determine whether or not the denial is appropriate before you get to the damages.
Mm-hmm. So it would have to be reinstated, and then we could be looking at damages, which would impact the city's finances. Okay, thank you.
Is that all? Okay. I have one question, and that has to do with the floodplain. I saw your pictures, and I'm familiar with the location. It's a very steep hill from the back to the front. So water normally comes down the hill, and that's why that little concrete culvert was down probably at the lowest part of the property to catch that and have it run off. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And I also know that in December, that was not a 100-year flood. It was more like a 400 and something year flood.
Yes.
To where we did extremely well in Temecula, even with the large amounts of rain, because we did it right. And it looks to me at the pictures that the water drained off very quickly, and it doesn't really look like it was a problem to me.
That was our assessment as well when we took the photos, and then we did the analysis showing that slide, if you recall, where we showed the outline of where the building would be. So we saw that based on the photo provided in the appeal, that water would not be touching the structure. So it looks so far like it is in fact out of the floodplain.
Okay, thank you. Peter, did you have anything else on your analysis of legal issues, or does that cover it pretty much?
That covered it.
Oh, okay. Does anybody have any other questions for staff from the council before we go further?
No, not right now.
Okay. Okay, it's time for the appellant, Mr. Rombach, to make his presentation, and you have 20 minutes, and about 19 and a half, I'll just tell you that you've got 30 seconds, and hopefully that thing works up there where the same thing when the amber light comes on, that's 19 minutes and 30 seconds. But that's a long time, so.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, staff, my name is George Rombach. I'm a Temecula resident. First, before I proceed, I would like to thank the staff. During this appeal process, they were very courteous and helpful. I've got no issue with that at all, and I think that they should be complimented. While I have some differences in some of the conclusions, I've always said in disagreeable situations, we don't have to be disagreeable when we disagree. And I hope that that carries through the evening. Slight issue on the notice of this hearing. I wasn't aware that either this chamber or this body had been renamed. The council chambers with an E. And I caught my wife caught that, because being a dyslexic, spelling has always been my worst suit of all. The other issue is it refers to me as the appellant individually. I am both individually and as a principal of Concerned American Citizens, and all of the addressing the appeal ignored the body of Concerned American Citizens. I did not personally receive notice other than because I got a request for an interview from the Californian at the facility when I walked out and saw the sign, which was less than the 10 days before this hearing. I'm not as prepared as I would like to be, but I am proceeding. But there are members of the Concerned American Citizens who are not here, at least in part, because they didn't get the notice through that appellate process. Much of the debate that has gone on in this process deals with freedom of religion. In this country, unlike many other countries, it's one of our cornerstones. It comes right down to the right to assemble and worship. It's the core, the very core of our freedom of religion. And I don't think this body or anybody has the right to deny a permit to worship or build a structure based on religion. I personally think that is un-American. That comes from our First Amendment in the Constitution. And also, a religious assembly cannot function without proper physical space. Approving a space that is adequate for their needs physically and theologically is appropriate. I do not object to that. I do not think that those items should be an issue this evening. They were issues significantly on the December 1st hearing. I do hope that for or against, members will refrain from those issues. I do not think that they are appropriate as a part of this appeal. However, the First Amendment does not require ignoring the community environment or public safety, or ignoring or changing the general plan of Temecula. Some of the issues that were my concern seem to have been resolved in the staff report. The aspect of while approved, Phase 2 really isn't approved unless FEMA approves it. I raised the question on December 1st, and why not approve it in 2 separate phases? Come back for the conditional permit once the issue of floodplain or not is resolved. I don't think that denies any First Amendment rights in any way, shape, or form to do that. Also, the other side of the First Amendment that most people don't look at, it mandates that no religion, I don't care what the religion is, be given any preferential treatment or be given any aid. That, my feeling is the application in effect does that in a few ways, which I will deal with. Our LUPA, that's been discussed, and all the council members seem to be well aware of it. I won't go into great depth other than to summarize that it requires that all religious institutions that are affected be on an equal footing. And I don't feel that equal footing has been provided. And in one particular area, we talked about denials of other religions on permits in that particular area. And the wording of staff was, my ears caught it well, that there was no formal denial. I personally, and my appeal has the sworn declaration, the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church, having run into problems over flood issues on another property in the Temecula area, gave up trying to build in that area. Now, they had not done their due diligence when they bought the property and didn't understand what was there. They gave up, sold that property, and they had $500,000 in the bank. Where do you think St. Nicholas wanted to build a church? On Nicholas Road? Be a logical choice, wouldn't it? I prevailed with the parish council saying, this time, let's do our due diligence before we buy the property, and went to the Planning Commission, told what we're anticipating in this same area, and was told, don't even bother. We're not going to approve another church in that region. Now that harkens back in my mind, I think I've said it in this chamber before, what's happening in Manhattan. A little Greek Orthodox church named St. Nicholas being denied the right to build while we're building a mosque in the same basic area. I don't think that's right. Now, it's not a formal rejection. I will acknowledge that. But for that communication from the Planning Commission, there might have been a formal denial. My recommendation to the parish council was, you're going to run into a stone wall, and that stone wall deals with floodplain. And these are the issues the Planning Commission told me. With the airport, I don't think size issues would have been a problem, but there was a denial, and the application, the appeal application, has my sworn declaration to that effect, and is not refuted. CEQA, the California Public Resources Code, has been brought out, and it's also an issue. I think there are issues that require environmental study. If the floodplain issue is resolved by virtue of the way we talked tonight, that won't be one of them. But the traffic is, and I'll get into that more a little later. But CEQA, pardon me, this project is moving forward, as I said, on a mitigated negative declaration. That provision of CEQA requires that the city have evidence to support that the mitigation damages, I mean, I realize it's projection, we all know that, but they have to have evidence to support the conclusion that the adverse circumstances have been mitigated, and I don't think you have that position, that evidence on this file at this time. The appeal covers a whole shopping list of things. I'm only going to cover 4 primary ones. The shopping list is predicated largely on the admonition of the Planning Commission that if you don't bring it up in the appeal, or you don't bring it up in the Planning Commission hearing, you may be precluded, as you so well read, precluded from bringing it in any further legal proceedings. So that shopping list, should there be further proceedings, preserving the right to do that. And you may hear from other members of the group as to other issues that were in that application. I'm going to address 4 primary ones: traffic, floodplain issues, parking, and the equal treatment. I understand the traffic reports, but there's one major conspicuous absence: the intersection of Nicholas Road and Calle Medusa, which is only feet from the Calle Calibra. That is part of an alternative of rush hour passageway to avoid Winchester. I've been out there several mornings and watched that intersection. It is a danger. During rush hour in the morning, you will see cars stacked up 20 up the hill, and they're waiting for a break on Nicholas. And when the break comes, you'll see 2 or 3 or 4 cars shoot through, ignoring the stop sign. It's like a gauntlet. That intersection was not addressed in the traffic report. I think it is a critical intersection. And by the way, to send this back to the Planning Commission to say, hey, I want to know what about that intersection, I don't think violates any First Amendment rights at all. Also, time of day. They didn't study rush hour on Monday through Thursday. Didn't study rush hour at all. Prayer, calls to prayer twice a day are going to be at rush hour. That's going to have an impact, whether it's 10 cars or 100 cars. It's going to have an impact on that intersection. What I have previously proposed, and has been so far ignored, is that a traffic signal be put in at the intersection of Nicholas Road and Cali Medusa, and that the controls of cars be from Cali Calibra, the Presbyterian Church parking lot, as well as the actual intersection. That's not a technically unfeasible project. Now, the objection that I got was that would be expensive. This intersection didn't have a problem a decade ago when those churches were built. It was a sleepy, rural area. As our growth in Temecula has increased, that condition now exists. I think this body needs to address that, notwithstanding the mosque. But one of the issues is, I think we should not make the condition any worse. A very usual aspect of, you're going to worsen the condition, let's fix that, and if somebody else comes along and use it, you get reimbursed from doing that. That signal could be put in and substantially reduce that, not only the present issue, but the exacerbating it by the addition of the mosque. That's, excuse me. The issue on accidents, one of our members, it almost made me cry when I heard the story. A boy riding a bicycle going on the Nicholas Road at the rush hour time, and he got caught the wrong way in running that gauntlet. Accidents are a danger. To not consider them, especially on a road that is not being used the way it was designed, which that intersection was not designed for the traffic flow that it has. It simply was not. And that's one of the mitigating factors staff brought up about safety and why accidents aren't considered. Because it's normally assumed that you would build roads to a safe condition, et cetera and so forth, and I believe they were originally. But things have changed. And therefore, I think the accident analysis ought to be an issue as well, at least on that one intersection. Like I said, that intersection is only feet from the intersection of Cali Calibra and the subject property. And like I say, it's so far been ignored. Also, there was a petition submitted to the Planning Commission of more than 1,000 signatures of area residents or other people that use that intersection, St. Nicholas Road and Cali Medusa. And they're concerned about the traffic as it now is and what will happen to it with this mosque. So far, those issues have been ignored. And I don't think that the concerns of 1,000 area residents are outweighed by wanting to build a mosque. I think there needs to be at least a balancing. There has not been any attempt to address their concerns. As I say, it would not violate any First Amendment right to send this project back to the drawing board and get the answers to these questions. Right now, I don't think those questions have been answered for you. I raised them on the first, I raised them in other communications, I raised them in the appeal, and I do not believe the staff reply has addressed them in the slightest. Floodplain issues. The policy 1.7 of the general plan, basically, I'll put it in my own phraseology, thou shalt not build in the floodplain. I realize I took a little liberty. If that's the condition is what will apply, I still question why we approved both phases. Why not get the floodplain issue resolved before a conditional use permit be applied for it? Is to be applied in that, built in that floodplain. There's a couple of issues that, from what staff's report, and I don't know if this is the event of reporters, but one reporter in the Californian referred to that floodplain is only an insurance issue. That gives the insurance companies a right to charge more. I don't buy that. The good work of Councilman Edwards a few years ago on the flooding that occurred in that area in 1979 and 1980 shows that's not the case. The photograph that was there does show some flooding. I can't swear because those nice little orange flags weren't out there. From what I saw, I couldn't swear that the flooding went into the building area or not. I would submit that what was on the photograph looked a lot smaller, that staff put in, looked a lot smaller than what I witnessed when I was out there myself. Another issue, another category of being neighborly. That day I went out there for the Californians interview. A gentleman on the other side of the subject property came out and said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, we're here talking about the mosque issue." And he said, "I don't give a blankety blank what they do up in the mosque. What are they going to do with the water?" And he points over to the curb and street in front of the two existing churches and said, "It runs right down here and it runs across the front of this lot. What's going to happen when they put curbs and pavement in front of this new mosque? It's all going to end up in my front yard and in my living room. What are they going to do about that?" I said, "Well, based on my review of the plans, there's no provision for it." I would think that any religious institution would want to be neighborly and say, "Okay, let's extend the curbs and paving past their front yard. You got open land beyond that, and let that water just gather and keep right on going and not flood him out and flush him down the storm drain." I think that's not an unreasonable request. I said, "I'm sorry, it's not mine to grant or deny your request." You've already got that picture. Again, changing or amending the Temecula general plan, there is no requirement under any constitutional amendment that says the city of Temecula has got to modify its general plan or change it for the benefit of an applicant. In fact, it's my position that to do so would violate the First Amendment rather than being required. Parking. Now, I will acknowledge and freely admit that what I asked the Planning Commission and asked this august body to do was to step out onto uncharted land. But the fact is, the formulas we're using for religious buildings in general don't work real well. If you go down to that intersection on a Sunday morning, I've done it several times, there are cars, the parking lots are full, and there are cars on the curbs of every street in the area. That's the current condition. That tells me that the formula that was applied is not working very well.
Mr. Rumbaugh, you're at your 20 minutes now.
Okay.
Okay. I'll give you another 30 seconds just to, if you had some other things on there, just tell us, but just 30 seconds, that's it.
Okay. I think the parking issue, that we ought to pull back and look at the parking issue, what's happening in the mosque in Corona. Similar sized mosque, similar sized parking issues, and if you go up there, that parking lot is accommodating between 20 and 25% of their needs. You know, there's an old saying, where the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think the issue of parking for a mosque, their ecclesiastical requirements are, and I'm not saying they're inappropriate, but the fact is they need more parking than other institutions. Even the Christian operations that are there now need more parking than they have.
I'm going to have to ask you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, the applicant will make their presentations, and that's Ayman Harmosh and also Hadi Nail.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
May I ask a quick question of staff?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Just want to get some clarity on this. Mr. Butler, Nicholas and Cali Medusa.
Yes, sir.
What problem, no problem? Was it studied, not studied? The Royal Par Ranch fixing it, what's the scoop?
Yeah, Nicholas and Kaya Medusa, I would agree there's cut-through traffic that goes through there right now. The city is actually preparing to implement a project out on Butterfield Stage Road that will get easier access to a north-south element out on Butterfield Stage Road from Nicholas through Kaya Garrisol. That should ease some of the traffic that cuts through on Kylie Medusa right now. Our traffic engineer can elaborate a little bit more on how we selected the different intersections that were studied. I believe they are correct, though. This intersection was not part of the overall scope of the traffic engineering study.
And you didn't feel there was a need to study it?
No, I did not, sir.
And just why?
The problems that we experience out there are not exacerbated by the mosque. The amount of traffic that the project is actually going to introduce into the area is minimal compared to the traffic that's out, the current background traffic that's out there.
Okay. And you kind of segued to my next question. Butterfield Stage Road project, we're going out to bid on that, correct?
We should be out to bid on phase 1 of that project in the next 30 to 60 days.
Briefly describe how that works, where it connects, where it goes from where to where.
Butterfield Stage Road is going to be a north-south connection right on the easterly city limits. It's going to run from Murrieta Hot Springs Road all the way down to Rancho California Road. Phase 1 is going to get us the connection from Murrieta Hot Springs Road down to Calle Chapos, which is the natural extension if you were to travel east, if you will, on Nicholas, turns into Calle Garrisol, which then again turns into Calle Chapos. That will get you a direct connection to Butterfield Stage Road. Phase 2 of the project will extend that further to the south and make the connection to where Butterfield Stage Road terminates now at the intersection of La Serena.
When do you expect phase 2 to start?
Phase 2 could start anywhere in the next 12 months to 18 months. We're still working out some right-of-way issues with some property rights that we need to deal with in this.
So phase 2 is a sure thing.
We have funding in place to do it.
For phase 2, and phase 1 we're going out to bid on.
The next 30 to 60 days.
And it's reasonable to assume that with the construction of phase 1, it should pretty much relieve the cut-through traffic.
The traffic patterns out there will be drastically different after that segment of roadway is constructed.
Okay, very good. And then just quickly, because I really want to put these things to rest so they don't keep coming up, is the flooding on Nicholas. Please speak to that.
The floodplain issue is one that many properties along a drainage course or low-lying areas anywhere in the city have to contend with. FEMA is the keeper of the firm maps or the flood insurance rate maps that show you the various flood zones that are out there. The area of the subject project has not been formally mapped by FEMA at all. So we can speculate where the floodplain's elevations will be based upon some historical data that we have, based upon some hydrology studies that were done for the Nicholas Valley Preservation Project that we did. And removing a piece of property out of the floodplain can be done by two fashions. One, you do a hydraulics and a hydrology study to show that the floodplain elevation for the design flood, which is a 100-year storm, is set at this elevation. If your property lies above that elevation, you're removed out of the floodplain. It's nothing that the city does. It's nothing that the property owner does. It's just a matter of documenting where the floods will be based upon the engineering data that you can collect. The other means that you can get your property out of the floodplain is if you were to find out through that study the area you wanted to improve was indeed getting inundated in a 100-year storm. It's just a matter of doing some grading to elevate the property up 1 foot above that 100-year floodplain elevation, and then you would go through the exact same process as if you were to find it wasn't naturally in the floodplain. It just hasn't been formally documented in this area.
So is it reasonable to assume that if Phase 2 of this project goes forward and they obtain their CLOMAR, which is
correct,
a
conditional letter of map revision, they would have to fix any flooding as it relates to their property and theoretically channel that water into a storm drain system? That's absolutely correct, and that's one thing I did want to clarify, that not only would we condition the project to do the necessary street improvements to their half or their frontage on Cali Calibre, but also on Nicholas Road, there would be conditioned to implement and install the necessary storm drain facilities to convey the storm flows back to their natural drainage course. And in this case, it will likely be catch basins and a culvert or a piping system that would convey the water into Santa Gertrudis Creek, which is on the north side of Nicholas Road. And another segue now, thank you. Santa Gertrudis Creek and the improvements to Nicholas Road. When those improvements that are slated for Nicholas Road occur, there should be a storm drain conveyance in Nicholas Road, or are we using Santa Gertrudis Creek and upsizing it? How's that going to happen? Combination of both. One of the things that the Roripaw Ranch project was in the process of doing before things started to slow down and stop was going through the process of proving that their proposed elevations for Nicholas Road improvements were indeed out of the floodplain. They hadn't finalized that process yet. There's actually going to be a direct connection from Nicholas straight out to the east over the creek with a bridge that will keep the road up over the creek out of the floodplain and then connect directly to Butterfield Stage Road. But that's, a few years down the road. Very good, thank you. And then one last question for Mr. Richardson. When we're talking planning parlance, Mr. Richardson, words mean something. And Mr. Rombach said on several different occasions that we're changing the general plan, that we're making, we're doing something we didn't do for somebody else. We're stretching the general plan. We're twisting it. We're doing something abnormal. Is any of that exist?
No, in this case, the zoning and the general plan designation allows for a religious facility with the approval of a conditional use permit. So there's no general plan change as part of this application, nor a zone change as part of this application.
And then one last question, maybe for Mr. Butler. We updated our general plan in 2005. As part of that general plan, we did an EIR for the entire city and for every road in the city. Right. And we gave new road designations, and we designated Nicholas Road to handle a certain capacity. That capacity, once that's set, we then designate land uses so that it's copacetic with that capacity, correct? Complemented, yes. So it complements. And in other words, you have to make sure there's road capacity to accommodate the land use. That's correct, sir. Okay. So whether there were 3 churches in this area, or 4 or 6 or what have you, if it was in accordance with this general plan and zoning designation, then it was studied by the general plan EIR and should be accommodated if indeed it's zoned and stated in the general plan. Is that reasonable? That is reasonable, and that is typically the case when we go through something of this nature. Like Eric said earlier on, when we explained to the applicant some of the concerns that were raised to us, they wanted to put the issue to bed, and they said, let's get a traffic study and be done with this. Typically, a project of this would not be required to do a traffic study. Okay, and then you're good at segueing, and I'll finish up. Is it safe to say that the reason why we do an EIR when we do our general plan is so that projects who come in subsequently don't have to do EIRs, they just have to conform to the general plan? Is that... As long as they conform with the general plan, and Patrick can confirm this as well,
Typically, there's no need for additional CEQA environmental clearance. There could be some minor mitigation measures and things like that, but for the most part, roadway designations will cover the general plan land use.
That is correct, and we're in a situation where we have a recently adopted general plan update, and through the project review, through mitigation measures, and in some instances, traffic studies or technical studies that are done to look at project-specific impacts, essentially the environmental issues are addressed. The overall general plan and the EIR that was prepared for the general plan takes into that maximum worst-case build-out under our land use designations.
So said another way, if we're looking at a 10,000-foot view with the general plan, anything that we may have missed during that macro view of the general plan in that area would have been solved or caught as we drill down and look at it project by project, which case a stop sign here, a traffic light there, a widening of a road, a fixing of a storm drain, that type of thing. Is that a correct statement?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Patrick, I have concerns when an appellant says that they were not adequately noticed, or perhaps neighbors were not adequately noticed. Could you explain, please, the notification process?
Yes, I'd like to, Mr. Rombach is correct. He did not receive a mailed notice. However, when he submitted his appeal on December 15th, he was informed that the hearing would be January 25th. We had contact with him throughout the remainder of December and into January on several occasions, reiterating the hearing would be on January 25th. One of the things that's part of the appeal that's required is that the appellant has to submit a list of labels for property owners and the applicant within the surrounding area. Mr. Rombach requested, and we waived the requirement that he submit labels. He asked that we use the same labels that we use for Planning Commission, which we did. Again, I have documentation through emails that Mr. Rombach was told the meeting was going to be on the 25th. The issue of the sign that was posted on the property, it misspelled. We had it corrected several times, but the sign unfortunately was vandalized over the last 10 days. And we've actually had the sign company out there 2 or 3 times to correct it, but it was posted on the sign at least 13 days.
So the same person that kept correcting it also couldn't spell every time that they corrected it, was that the case?
Yes.
And Patrick, just to clarify, we noticed him verbally on the phone when we talked to him, and does email qualify also?
We notified
as notification?
We notified him verbally and via email, and he verified in an email sent to us last week that he had talked with the property owners surrounding the project and they had received written notice.
So, Peter, does email satisfy the requirement for written notification?
Yes, it does. The only requirement is for actual notice, and that was clearly given. And in addition to that, the government code provides that in the event there's not adequate notice, that the applicant has to actually show prejudice. And in this case, we have 2 full rooms of people to speak plus 95 speakers. So the word has gotten out that this was the time and place for the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Comachero.
Just one quick one for Patrick as well. Mr. Rombach talked a little bit about an application for the Greek Orthodox Church. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with his assertion. We went back through all of our applications and records. There has nothing been filed for a Greek Orthodox Church in that area. Now, if there was an application filed prior to the city's incorporation in 1989, we wouldn't have records of that. But after 1989, there's no record of that it had gone to the Planning Commission. If it gets elevated to a public hearing it only gets to the Planning Commission if it's a public hearing.
And sorry, that was where I had some concern because there's something didn't jive there. If the Planning Commission mentioned to the applicant at that point, don't bother, you're not going to get it approved, well, then there would have had to have been an application submitted, or it never would have gotten to the Planning Commission, so,
Yeah.
but we have no record of it?
There's no record.
Okay, thank you.
Could it have been the County Planning Commission?
It may have been. I do know that the Calvary Baptist Church, the phase 1 of that project was built prior to incorporation, and then their expansion that they did in 2003 obviously was in the city. So there could have been an inquiry while it was in the county, but obviously we don't have those records.
All right, thank you. Okay, let us have the applicants come up. You have 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes, we'll take a break, right around 9 o'clock.
Good evening. My name is Hadi Nayel. I'm the chairman of the Islamic Center of Temecula Valley. I would like to thank the City Council, Planning Commission, city staff, the press, members here. Thank you for coming over. As I said, my name is Hadi Nayel. I'm the chairman of the Islamic Center of Temecula Valley. On behalf of the board of directors and our community, I would like to thank the Planning Commission for approval of a two-phase development in December 1st for our property at in the corner of Nicholas and Calle Colibri. Parking phase, I will leave that to Mr. Stephen.
Hi, my name is Stephen Sigler, Access Through Architecture, project architect for this project. And again, thank you, Mayor, City Council members and commissioners, and particularly the planning staff who have worked very diligently and cooperative with all of us, including those who are for and opposing this project. Regarding the parking phase, by the way, our intention is to follow the outline that was given by the Planning Commission that addresses each of the appeal issues, and we'd like to follow that format one by one. First issue is parking. As was stated in the response from the city, and I'll quickly read this, Institute of the Transportation Engineers IT study and concluded that a 6.3 parking space per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area is needed. Phase 1 of project, 4,157 square feet require 27 parking spaces. 104 spaces are provided. And I apologize, this was obviously previously stated by Eric from the planning, but we wanted to emphasize how important it is that we want everyone to know here that we've complied both with the city ordinances and fortunately with this other study. City staff calculated parking based on the assembly area and determined that phase 1 will require 91. We've provided 104. Next slide, please. Phase 2 project, parking is a similar situation. I'll just say, without reading all of this, we have complied with the parking and then some. Next phase. In summary, in parking in phase 2, as I just stated, and not to repeat what Eric had read before, there are, I think, more important issues to get to. We believe that the parking has more than sufficiently been addressed and approved by Planning Department. And thus, we concur with staff recommendation. As a point, phase 1, if we were to compare it to any typical structure, commercial or residential, the size of phase 1 is 4,157 square feet, about the size of a home. So we're not talking about a large structure on phase 1. Next. This is a view looking from the back side of the property toward Nicholas, basically kind of northwest. Next slide.
I'll leave the traffic report to Mr. Arnold Turmer and George Gossain. Please come forward. You can talk about the traffic report.
Arnold Torma with KO8 Corporation. I didn't actually expect to make a presentation here, but I think we'd be happy to respond to those questions that the council members might have, and Eric has, and we have spoken to several of those issues. So if you're comfortable with that.
That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. And again, we concur with staff recommendations. Thank you. You're on.
Emergency, all road improvements required meet emergency vehicle access. Standards have been reviewed and accepted by the fire and police department. Therefore, emergency access on Calle Colibre will not be impaired by this project. We concur with staff recommendation. Environmental issues?
You have that?
Right. The initial study for the project was drafted and routed to all appropriate agencies on May 28, 2010, as stated by Mr. Eric Jones. Comments received by outside agencies were incorporated into the mitigated negative declaration. The study revealed that the project impacts could be mitigated to less than significant levels. As a result, an environmental impact report was not required for the project. We concur with staff recommendation.
Now to the issue that seems to be of concern, and we want you all to know that we too have concerns with this issue and believe that we have mitigated them, and would like to share with you how we have mitigated this. And again, without reading all of this, which was read before, I would like to go to the next slide. And we recognize that this issue with FEMA and the city requirements and how they work together, we simply ask that the requirements be applied to this project as any other previous project, and that we go through the typical process that doesn't necessarily require FEMA, and this is why we believe this. If we could move to the next. Once we've identified Phase 1 and Phase 2, which we have architecturally and engineering-wise, as we have stated before, Phase 1 is being planned and would like to start construction as soon as possible. Our intent was actually to build both phases, not Phase 1 and Phase 2. But given the economic climate, it has been decided by the applicant to build Phase 1. Now, in specifically addressing, next slide, and again, I'm going to, I would prefer not to read all this because it's been read before, if that's okay, and I'd like to get to the real meat of the issue of this flooding concern. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we have, let's go, now, continue.
No, we don't compare.
Now, regarding, if we could go to the maps is what I, sorry about that. Bear with us for just a moment.
The maps maybe from them here. Somebody doesn't have the map.
That's okay. Unfortunately, the map that I would like to refer to, I can describe to you. And in doing so, within our grading plan, if you don't mind, I'd like to grab the grading plan. I thought we'd have it here, and I'll roll it out and I can explain this. In short, and we apologize, we'll hopefully get that added, loaded while I'm discussing this. Concerns have been addressed, and I think rightly so, that the current elevation of the property that we have is within a 100-year floodplain. And it was stated by the Director of Public Works that if a project is built and can be shown that it is above that floodplain, then it would follow the normal processes. Now, in a parcel map that was done and approved by the county, and actually it was parcel map 1157, it indicates a floodplain elevation of 1157. Now, this elevation, if you will, is about midway in the property. So the previous picture that we had seen of the property where it's shown the red layout of the property, in the middle of the property, if we were to imagine 1157, well, at the front of the property, the elevation of that is from the front to the back is approximately 35-foot different elevation if you were to transverse across the front of the property to the back of the property. Now, if we were to take this excess soil, obviously our property is going to be a cut condition into this hill that is there. Once that occurs, that excess soil is going to be brought forward on into the front of the property. Now, what's interesting is the existing elevation at 1157 that I described is the floodplain line. Our project is at 1163, which is 6 feet above this projected floodplain line. The parking area is 3 feet above the projected floodplain line. So we are contending that we have complied with mitigating proposed any flood issues and concerns, not just the building, but the parking area. And we apologize for not having the map. I have the site plan here, and we'll share that with you when we get the chance. So really the bottom line of our contention is that the flooding is not an issue with our site once we have the proper grading accomplished. Okay? Sure, if we could do that. Okay.
There's a camera directly over that table.
Part of the magic of the building.
There we are.
Is that better?
Much better. You can see it.
Yeah, we have it right here.
Oh, great. Okay. Sorry about that, and you know how plans go sometimes. And thank you all for your patience. I'd like to direct your attention now to the floodplain that I'm referring to that was the floodplain identified through the County of Riverside. I've handwritten in about the middle of the page, and let me use my pointer if it'll work. Okay, great. If you look right here is 1157, seems weird. And the line I'm referring to is this line right here. That and this direction is considered within the floodplain. So the first impression would be certainly we are well within that floodplain. And so, thank you. So, a couple of years ago, as we started designing this project, the engineering and architects, we recognized this situation. So what we've done is, in the front of the property is 1156. The back of the property, I'm talking about the natural grades, is at 1190. That difference is approximately 35 feet. So the question is, what do we do with all this varying terrain? What we have done is we've cut the back of the property, taken that dirt and flipped it to the front of the property. By doing that, we have what is called a balanced condition of using that soil. We're not exporting any of the soil. We're utilizing what is on site. With that, we then have accomplished what I described before. This area is 3 feet above that plane line average. This building is 6 feet above that. It has always been our intention to build this as one complete facility. It always has been. Now, we have decided, or the committee applicant has decided, because again of the economic conditions, to go with phase one. It is our contention that FEMA would not apply. We believe that because of what we've demonstrated and has been on the plans for a long time, that this condition satisfies the grading and the flooding issue.
If you can go to this projection.
Okay. Now, could you go back to the previous? So I'd like to emphasize this. The project is reviewed by the city and has been conditioned as Phase 1 and 2 as proposed by the applicant, not the city. It is important to understand that the phasing of this project has no bearing upon the floodplain issue. Again, phasing the project is a request by the applicant only due to current economic climate. As a brief overview, the flood issue relating to this project is as I had stated earlier. Now, in the...
Can we present?
Could we project this next slide up? Okay. To demonstrate what we have just described, I know it's difficult to see, but this is looking, Nicholas is to our back. We're looking at the hill that is toward the back of the property, and you can slightly see the red tape that's toward the back of the property, but just at the base of the hill. To our right, you'll notice it's rather dark, but there's a barrel and an individual standing next to that barrel. The barrel's 3 feet high to demonstrate how high the parking would be, and the individual's 6 feet high. So that gives all of us, I think, a good indication of what would happen on that site as we finish our grading that would occur at Phase 1. The grading is not phased, it's done in the first phase. Okay, next one. The applicant has met all requirements originally required and has demonstrated compliance and mitigation of floodplain issues and request approval by the city.
Other churches have been denied permits. City planning has reviewed applications for other religious facilities and has approved numerous projects within our community. This project is a religious facility and as such should be afforded the same rights and freedom as with previous religious projects. We concur with staff recommendation. How to minutes? I'll leave it to Mr. Sigler.
Regarding any issues regarding the height of the minarets on the structure, which was addressed previously by the planning, as a comparison, height of steeple about Calvary Baptist Church is 55 feet. The maximum overall height of proposed facility is 43 feet above grade. This was discussed and approved through planning, and again, we concur with staff recommendation. Next.
Sunday services, the traffic study analyzed this issue and concluded that traffic impacts will be reduced to less than significant levels with the recommended mitigation. There is no valid reason to prohibit services on Sunday for any religious facility. We concur with staff recommendations. Substantial burden issues to, I can't even pronounce it.
Arlupa.
Arupa. Projects located within the very low, again, staff has already addressed this. Conditional use permit was approved by the Planning Commission December 1st, 2010. If you go to the next slide. We concur with staff recommendation on this issue. Next slide. Consideration of the SB 375. Again, for the sake of not being repetitive, this was addressed before, and we concur with staff recommendation.
Documentations, applicant have no comments. A brief overview, it is not the intent of the applicant to further delay the overall project by obtaining additional FEMA approvals with regard to the phasing of this project. It is the applicant's intention to have the city approve both phases of the project simultaneously. Again, thank you on behalf of the Board of Directors and our community. I'd like to thank Mayor Ron Roberts, Mayor Pro Tem Chuck Washington, Council Member Jeff Comerciero, Council Member Marian Edwards, Council Member Mike Najjar. Also extend my thanks to all city officials, and I'm looking forward for full approval. And as the mayor said, for regarding the rain, it goes beyond 100 years, 400 years. I was looking at the back of my bedroom, it looks like Noah's rain. So I'm sure the property will qualify for final approval. Thank you very much, and God bless America.
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Questions you have?
I have a,
I don't want to apologize for the technical difficulty.
we got through it. It's all right.
That shows that we can go through emergency easily.
I do have a question, and while you're still standing there, you may want to address it, and I'd like to ask either Greg or Patrick as well. Something that you said troubles me a little bit, and that's concerning FEMA, and you're not looking to delay the project with an additional process in going to FEMA, and yet we've conditioned the project to do just that. And so are you asking that we revise that condition?
Well, I may want to drag or ask Patrick to jump in here with me, but it is the applicant's understanding that this was fairly new, and we did not realize that the FEMA requirement was required, nor did I think it was clearly understood that of our mitigation that we have accomplished in our grading plan. If it is true that we have mitigated that issue regarding we are above the floodplain, as was stated earlier, and it was our understanding that if that is the case, FEMA is not required.
Now, maybe I don't understand the process, but it's my understanding that the condition to go to FEMA is to define where the floodplain line is. How can we do that without going to FEMA, regardless of whether you're raising the property out of what we perceive to be the floodplain now or not?
That's correct. The project is conditionally approved. They are allowed to go forward with phase one, which includes mass grading of the entire site, and then construction of the initial 4,000 plus square foot facility. However, before they can get a building permit to move forward with phase two, we are requiring them to work with FEMA to get a conditional letter of map revision to prove unequivocally that the property that they intend to build upon is outside the floodplain. Okay. Right now, it's unmapped in that area.
Okay, and that condition hasn't changed.
No, it has
between
not.
being imposed by the Planning Commission. Obviously, they would have to change it,
Correct.
or we would.
Yeah, if I can respond, that condition was discussed with the applicant prior to the original hearing date that was set for November 17th, and it was included in the resolution of approval on December 1st.
Okay, thank you.
That was my question too, Mr. Mayor.
Anything else? Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break now. It's 9 o'clock. We'll start about 9:10. We'll take our speakers, and I'll open the public hearing. We'll have our first speaker, and we'll go for about an hour until we take another, like a 10-minute break. Okay, we're at recess.
Oh, me too, yeah.
Test 1, 2. 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 3.